Okay, from George William Russell, Growing Luminous. On the mystic path, we create our own light. And at first, we struggle blind and baffled, seeing nothing, hearing nothing, unable to think, unable to imagine. We seem deserted by dream, vision, or inspiration, and our meditation barren altogether. But let us persist through weeks or months, and sooner or later that stupor disappears. Our faculties readjust themselves and do the work we will them to do. Never did they do their work so well. The dark caverns of the brain begin to grow luminous. We are creating our own light.
Thank you so much. That seems such an apt reading given our topic for today. The overall theme for the week is Heroes of Light during this year of Light on the Path. And we're very fortunate to have Marie-Ange Ubersachs with us. She and I have a life so far in the brief half a year that we've known each other being marked by serendipities. And when I was looking for someone to speak on this idea of heroes of light, the person that came to mind as a subject for such a talk was Helen Keller, who was born hearing and seeing, but within the first year and a half or so of her life, lost both of those abilities. And this is someone who Marie-Ange has actually done research on in preparation for her forthcoming book. In addition to writing, she's a body worker. She's had a healing center in or near San Luis Obispo, California. And she is somebody who's taken up many of the world's traditions and looked at them from a spiritual perspective. And I feel that we're so blessed to have her speak to us today on Helen Keller, one of my great sheroes.
Well, thank you, Renee. I think that I want to clarify that the research I've done was not specific to Helen Keller until you mentioned it, and I was compelled to do a deep dive from what I knew, which was minimal, to what I've now assimilated in the last bit. But I very much feel akin to her experience through the senses and her sensory awareness, and how it has continued to push the envelope of our understanding of quantum biology, which I've been very involved in studying in the last year, and also in looking at mental illness and the idea of penetrating the darkness in order to bring out the light. And so this was a really beautiful journey to kind of show you an example of a shero, a new shero for me, and somebody that continues to inspire people in research right now. For your delight, I'm doing my first, trying to do my first experience with this program that we call Google Slides. And so I'm with me, and I didn't share screen.
Yeah.
One more moment.
Sure.
One more moment. Am I sharing screen? Okay.
Quite yet.
Getting there, getting there, getting there.
Okay. Something's happening.
Okay. Try now. I am sharing my screen.
Yes. We see.
I did.
Perfect.
Okay. So the introduction of what you mentioned in her first year, Helen Keller really didn't have the opportunity to know a whole lot of what was going on. They assumed that she had scarlet fever or something that shut out the senses of hearing and of sight. And ultimately, she became this tremendous optimist. And under this phrase, I thought we could all be inspired about the idea of closing down one aspect of our lives, whether it's retiring and moving into something new, or whether it's shifting to a new residence, or if it's someone who's somehow changed their capacity through what might be a disability or limitation. So I thought we'd open ourselves up to that feeling of opening a new door to our own sensations by just kind of being in your room for a moment, looking around just simply, and then just feel that sense that you have colors and you've got textures. And just take another moment, just turn a little bit to your other side and just notice whether there's form of a chair or even just another animate being that might be there with you. And then I just want you to close your eyes and then make it all go away. But it doesn't really. Something else fills that void. So opening your eyes, that's the idea of going to and penetrating our consciousness to see that there's another way to look at the world or feel the world. This picture I like of her because she began by understanding light itself through the vibration and sensation of the sunlight. And I wore this, because it was bright and cheery and I could see it, you could see it, but she could feel it from a deeper sense of becoming acute to the nano experience of her body, feeling the light and coming within. And as a body worker, Reiki practitioner, or dancer or speaker or teacher, any of you could feel the room or feel our people who were the recipients of our practice, and you could feel their energy. So similarly, she takes this idea of light, and I love the idea that we make perceptions of what we see, and we see the sun go from sunrise to sunset, but we're the ones moving and we're the ones changing, and the sun is kind of more static in that essence. Now, I'm not a physicist or an astrophysicist, but that touched me as the eyes are a sense of perception in her world that creates judgment. And by removing the sight from that experience, we can access another untwisted vibration of truth within. So Helen continues to move into philosophy from that point of view, that truth is untethered to sight. And so when she comes to, the lack of senses does not dull our mental faculties or distort our world view. So the other sense that she didn't have was hearing. So the sense of not being able to hear as things changed around her in her environment as she was growing up was brought to her through the gift of Anne Sullivan, who taught her to feel and sense through her hands, through touch, and through the movement of water. And this is a compelling moment when she could then put language into the vibrations she was feeling. So she held in a common picture the idea of a doll and then began to spell doll. And through the configuration of her spelling, she identified this wonderful world of language. And the language was unadulterated by the sense of hearing it or seeing it. And so she opened herself to not be distorted by that animation of someone who might be speaking to her, or at the same time liberated by the context of how she saw the element. And that just created an extraordinary opportunity, I think, for me to say, how am I really looking at the world around me through a distorted vision of being a female with these obligations of being a nurturer, of being something I was told to be in as an academic or something. And so we can kind of start to downgrade the illusion of what we see in ourselves and move towards a sense of our experience a little bit differently. I then realized that the practice of illumination within is something that an artist does, the dancer does, the movement is training through our perception to understand the universe. So the idea that I noticed with her is that she studied the form of a breeze and the wind, and she waited for who would come before she knew who it was, but she knew that that was someone coming in or something changing. So how subtle is that energy in our own vibration, where we are compelled to notice the innuendo of a breeze as the door opens and closes. And that brings me to some of the current research I was kind of really excited about during this last year of deep dive into the neurobiology of us, or we, where we feel like we can make associations in order to create a language within. An example might be, I want to think of, and do this with me. I want to think of a eucalyptus tree right now, and I just want to feel and sense what that would be like. And just imagine whether you can actually smell the eucalyptus coming through, or maybe it's a tuberose. But the only way that we could have done that is how? And we make these associations, in her case, by smell and by touch, and also by the way that it comes to her through a breeze, in that as it moves the stalk, she understands the form of the blossom or the leaf actually generating with the heat of the day, the elements. I hope that was a good example, in that we conjure up these images of our reality in form of a quantum world or of a tiny particulative world into an image of a tree. And now we can use that tree or draw that tree or even sculpt that tree. But it takes all of our senses and memories within to accumulate this. So how she became adept in this was through practice in Braille, and became also, and you see this on this, that it leads to her sense of being able to understand kinesiology and movement. This is her on the upper right, touching dancers in form and to understand the movement. Now she can't see what they're doing, but she can feel the curves are generating in the movement, in the generation of movement. She knows which way they're going to lean, because it's not a straight line, it's not directed. So she understands this form, and from there she's able to craft an understanding of really complex ideas and philosophies as she became more educated and got her degree. But she continued to practice so that she could come to write and craft some very logical understandings of philosophy. And just kind of thinking about the discouragement of sitting there trying to learn enough to where you could write an entire treatise and she wrote at least 12 publications that were circled throughout the globe. And that just took the drilling and the dedication and the partnership that she had with her teachers, and specifically Anne Sullivan. One of the books that I absorbed at the beginning of this study was Optimism. And this is where I start seeing her coming into this consciousness of having faith. because without sight, she could still configure the dancers. She could still conceive of the methodology of creating movement and creating poetry. And so this is where she kind of crafts this idea of being the eternal optimist and continuing to propel other people to kind of have this encouragement. And that's where she started working with other scientists and philosophers and starting to kind of emerge a greater understanding, I think, of how literature philosophy actually is interconnected. And similarly, I can read a book, but if I don't practice the concepts of it, am I really intimate with that practice of the thing that can I believe it until I know it, until I practice it? So jumping into faith there's a magical leaf, something that embodying the energy of understanding, of knowing. You embody a different aspect of just reading something. The lack of senses should not dull our mental faculties is the curious thing, because how does smell help us really understand the concept of something Emerson would have talked about? And so that just continues to kind of give, I think, our current understanding of cures and aspects of healing a lot to bring us in the creation of new ways of understanding and moving just beyond the book learning. Okay, I wanted to just jump into this kind of manifesto that she worked in about evil, and some of it was about darkness of her own life, and that the idea that America was this amazing place that really kind of resolved a lot of the social ills of the day and really did this noble work to move forward and to show that diversity was extremely key, not only from the disabled, if you will, or the people who she represented and became a voice for, but also as a suffragist movement, if you will, and the idea of everyone who toils really is about creating a greater world through that interdependence. She really marveled at people who understood the textures and touch of working with the land, and at the same time just knowing that they were much more capable of knowing the greatest truths because they understood the way nature worked. As Renee mentioned, and before I kind of get some closure here, I'm working on a book called Open Spaces, Open Mind, where I wanted to talk and show the chemistry of us being in nature and trying to adapt and understand and regulate our nervous systems, our patterns of circadian rhythms. And so looking at this idea that being close to the earth gives us more appreciation at that subtle level. Her dog is often brought to her. I'm just going to move something out of the way here. Her dog through the living world that doesn't have the same forms as us, we can use our surmise that there are myriad of sounds that ears have not heard. And that contact with her dog became, as they experience joy, as they experience hunger, as the dog would wag the tail through a vibration heard near a window, informed her. Similarly, a story of my own work in this Open Spaces, Open Mind, I meandered onto a eucalyptus grove and I felt a sense surround me that I couldn't pinpoint, I couldn't understand, I couldn't know. And just what engulfed me was this information. And it really gave me this atmosphere, put me in an atmosphere of knowing, of the conceptual emptiness I needed to know to have that liberation of knowing what that sound was. And so I wanted to comprise the idea that if we slow down in subtle ways and use the sensory limit our senses, then it's a gift of kind of getting in new instruction. She became, as a shiro, a real component for integrity and authenticity. And I think that that challenged her to equip her movement towards becoming a point of light. And I didn't even know in Washington, D.C., there's a walkway for the points of life, people who have inspired and given so much to kind of how they made a positive impact on society. And, through her works on optimism about the life underneath and within, it certainly compels us to look not just in the moments of what she gave in her life, but how we're looking back into our biology and the quantum fields of light in biology. I'm going to kind of end a little bit, and maybe I can answer some questions or stimulate something. But without shy, fugitive, often unobserved sensation, taste, smell, and touch, I should lack the alchemy by which I now infuse into my world light, color, and the protean spark, the sensuous reality which interthreads and supports all gropings of my imagination. If I didn't have the fugitive lack, I would be walking among the invisible ghosts. So by having the lack of sight and sound, she enabled the taste and smell and touch to bring her alive and to bring her vividness back into a life of expression. I close with this tribute location to her that she used hands and to replicate, to touch. She walked with people, she held their hands, and she could comment that by that touch, she could even know, even though a person was a noble leader and a baseball player, they still had sensitivity and softness. There was a quality of touch that she could actually read into the individual person she was with. And so this is my challenge to you. Imagine yourself putting your hands at this well at the top of the water and feeling the water come over your hands. And through that movement, learning for the first time what that water is telling you and telling your field of your flow within, all of the components of our circulatory system, our lymphatic system, the blood, everything induced by this water. And through this, she learns the word water and can re-elaborate what that water feels like in the different systems of our bodies, or in our rivers, or in the repair of our civilizations. So in essence, by learning the language of these kind of dismissed sensations, we can kind of form a better understanding of how we interpret our world, how we can connect to people. My challenge or gift to you from this talk is to use whatever sense, whether it's smell or touch, whatever you kind of want to use, and to see if you can kind of adequately embrace or lead with that in the next day or so. Or if you have the opportunity to hold someone's hand for long enough to really kind of kinetically sense where they're at, where their heart is, where their sense of peace is. So that when we come in, we may not be able to smile with our faces for everyone, or it may be a confused look if we do. But if we can use another sense, such as bringing a flower or holding a hand, then let's see if we can kind of make a little bit of a drift towards human understanding. So I kind of feel that I gained so much more from this little inquiry that I was asked to do in Helen Keller. But I just wanted to kind of open it up and thank you for this opportunity to share with you my thoughts on optimism and quantum light.
That's wonderful. Thank you ever so much, Marianne. And I got so much of a deeper sense of what she was up to through your descriptions and using words like her nano experience of light. Is that what you said? Her nano experience of light. And perhaps some of you get a letter that we put out monthly called Life at the Center. And in the last month or two, we sent out a letter that Helen Keller had sent to the leader of an orchestra. Maybe it was the New York Philharmonic, describing this incredible experience that she had had when she was with family members who were listening on the radio to this orchestral playing, and someone took the cover off of this diaphragm that was on the speaker that was playing the music, so that Helen Keller could put her hand right onto the vibrating diaphragm of the speaker. And she gives the most out of this world description of her experience of hearing this piece being played, this classical piece of music, and how she could hear all the different instruments that were coming through, as well as the human voices. And she could tell which ones were the tenors and the altos and the baritones. And she had this very, very full experience of, quote unquote, hearing this orchestra when she had no sound that could enter through her ears. And so, that was through the sense of touch. And so then when you described, the nano experience of light, which is in a different part of the electromagnetic spectrum, I guess, than sound, it started to make me wonder, wow, what was she picking up that sighted people have who are able to take in light?
I think that is explained by, the subtlety of that is kind of like the rush of air is different. So the vibration is different, and how it brought into her organs a different sense. Her hands were her organs, her fingers were her organs, and she could feel at different levels the movement of the vibration. And as it moved through her body, to me, just moving through the different vessels of connection of the fascial network. I think of the flower of life imagery. If you just take the flower of life and you put a vibration of a baritone, and then you put a piccolo in there, it's going to contrast differently. And somehow she, through dedication, learned the word piccolo and people's experience of what a piccolo was, and knew that it was excitable because the people, as they heard it, were more excitable. And so she had to take all these vibrations from the people, from the room, from the speaker. So it wasn't just the speaker and the movement of air. So how is that knowing, and how is that light? It is so fast and so responsive. She couldn't have evaluated the room on every stanza. She had to have another transcendent experience with it.
Mm-hmm. Is it in your reading, did it seem as though she could perceive color?
No, but had a different definition for color. And so that's what that was my takeaway for it.
Mhm.
And that not having to see it as color, she had no judgment on it and could go freely with color or with what it was presenting. It was joy. It was, yeah.
Right.
She could sense where a shadow was, and so she used darkness as well to find that texture and that drift in between a shadow and light, even though she was not seeing the shadow or the light, but the differential. Week ago, I was driving and thinking, it's noon, and some book I was listening to on tape, and it said, no, just take a moment. Oh no, it was like an insight timer meditation. Just look at the shadows around. And I thought, driving, there are no shadows. Wait, the car in front of me had no shadow. And the only shadow was under a tree, and it was directly under the tree. And it just, you forget that that we are associated with the circadian rhythm. And I don't know, technically, that's what some of the I was looking at the quantum biology and listening to a physicist say that the circadian rhythm or circadian cellular response is some of the things that we're advancing. And it's because of some of her work and how she pushed this forward and pushed the boundaries that they're even asking this question. And similarly, how they started looking at the way that birds use magnetic resonance for their ability to migrate and go to the same place.
Mm.
They travel through darkness.
People are opening it wide up now. Bob, Bob Buss.
I really appreciated what you talked, and it was interesting to me that the two senses that she did not have access to are the ones that come with distance. The three that she has left are tactile. Even the smell, if you've got, you're allergic to ragweed or have certain things like that, there is a tactile sense to smell, the molecules that come and touch. And it's interesting to me that in Buddhism, we speak of 6 senses, not 5. And the 6th sense is consciousness, which then perceives. So, as Renee was saying, well, the color green, for example, she doesn't sense visually, but she does perceive it. And she perceives it, as you mentioned, through the vibrational quality. And she'll have almost a poetic sense from our point of view, because we have that sense of color visually. And she would have, say, green as a softness. And for her, that softness is completely tactile. It's not the softness of color, which we can do, but it's rather the idea that she has then comes through those 3 senses that she has access to. And so the perception is there. So it's interesting if, as you mentioned, she had one of her first experiences was the word water from the tactile sensation of wetness. But you could also see that the perceptions there are different. So flow, for example, the flowing of water is not something you sense, it's something you perceive. It comes from consciousness. You can feel movement, but there's a bit of perception, ideation going on with that. So I think that's an interesting way to kind of look at it, is that the 5 senses play within that 6th sense of consciousness of perception. And then you play through those. So whenever I read Helen Keller, it just amazes me how poetic the words are, because when she quotes poetry like "My love is like a red, red rose," red is going to have a tactile quality. It's going to be, and she's going to associate it with words that then come to her through sensations of touch or smell or taste. And so I find it just amazing that she has that kind of quality. And then communication happens beautifully. Um, we can do that kind of thing, but it is a whole new way of thinking, as the Buddhist would say. And that's one of the reasons the Buddha has these six senses, including perception, is that our self is not any one of them. Our self is what experiences them. And so the experience is sort of the core, and her experience is just wonderfully different than ours. But then my experience is wonderfully different than each of yours.
Yeah. In Buddhist teachings that I've gone, that has always tripped me up, that my perception is not the same as everyone's perception. There is a table here. It's just a perception that it's a table. And, I've walked out because I can't get there. But reading through her work helped me understand that my sight, if I take that out, is the idea that she puts out there is that our sight twists things and creates judgment. And so what is consciousness is a piling up of these other sensory realities that is more clear and less confusing when you get to the point of the perception, as sturdy. So in a way, she's opening up the world of trying to understand this concept of that sixth sense, that's been mentioned to me, and giving me more of a magical, taking my mystical side that just kind of can toss it up as, oh, that's the mystery. But her word optimism and perception, I think, are almost synonymous in that there's a synergy of relation and understanding. And it helped me to kind of pull it out of that mystical, okay, I can just do that. It's, it's not a dream, it's real, but it's now something that has embodiment in senses of one sort or another. And the smell can conjure that up for me, or touch can. I don't know, that it's a really good point, and it hit me during the reading this week about those qualities of the Buddhist perception.
Thank you so much. Robert.
Well, it's
Robert.
interesting. You were talking about hope, and you had some quotes about hope from Keller. And she said that you can't be a true optimist unless you understand evil and pain and suffering. So I don't know, what did you think about how she gained a knowledge of evil and suffering?
One of the things that struck me is that she quoted she was holding a very frail young woman who was paralyzed and could feel a gentleness in her. So the quality and a giving and an empathy in her. As far as the evil, it was when she could feel feel or sense or the determination of someone overwhelming in a negative way, and ignoring the contribution of someone like this small child, feeble in her frame, but able to be in empathy and in that spirit of gentleness and kindness. So I think she contrasted through her senses evil versus, this hope and this optimism. And that's how I kind of interpreted that through. And she could also feel people change as she connected to them, everyone she would be with. I don't know, does anyone else have a thought, especially those of you who kind of struggle? I mean, struggle through the philosophies of different good and evil transitions.
Diana, what's your thought? Why
Well,
why would you think that you can't be an optimist unless you are acquainted with all these negatives of evil, pain, and suffering?
well, I think for me in meditation, we practice sitting quietly so that we can go underneath the words. And I think we all intuitively know someone's energy. We have felt it. They don't feel right, no matter what they're saying. They don't. It's almost like we have an intuitive knowing about that person, because 80% of what we perceive is not the words that people are speaking. But if we take away the sight and remain neutral, I think knowing evil or knowing pain actually is part of the whole. And it's like, you can't just say, I'm going to be optimistic. It's the idea of understanding and accepting everything as it is. And I think that we really do use our intuitive knowing more than we are. I think it's important for me to be aware of my intuitive knowing and trust that gut feeling of this doesn't feel right, or especially with all that's going on in the world right now, to be able to discriminate between what's evil and what's true. And it's not just the words, because the words are just beyond, and even the sights are beyond what I can comprehend. And so it's understanding that there's a lot of pain and evil in the world, but also holding it open so that when we see something, we're not automatically jumping into conclusions, but that we can actually feel, I can feel in my body that something doesn't feel right, or, it's like trusting that intuitive knowing. And I think for me, meditation helps me go underneath the words and rest in that uji, or that oneness, so that we can really feel what's happening versus getting caught in our brain and doing the judgments and all that's involved with that. So that's the thoughts that I was having.
Thank you so much.
I wanted the doing and the laboring was so important to her, in that if we're just dulled and we're not going underneath the woods, then in a way we're not doing kind of that, we're thwarting our own ability to stay in the light and stay conscious of, I think, a very, maybe even a Puritan kind of a dedication towards doing the work and keeping that drive and dedication. But she also could see that in nature as something grew, that if you didn't till it, if you didn't water it, if you didn't recognize that it was going to yield each year and come back stronger, then you miss that opportunity to kind of cultivate the good things that are that you can create in your life. It's almost like she lived 150 years in her time frame and could see so much, so many year after year, and could learn the lessons of her society, of our society at that time, and learn the lessons of nature simultaneously, and interpret the goodness that could come from that. As organizations were being developed, I mean, she was astute on a political level and an organizational level and at a charity level, that I think that really drove her understanding of humanity and had optimism because of that. And she'd probably be pretty critical of some of the things that she could see or hear right now through her perceptions, because she wouldn't have the judgment of, following the train one way or the other, or, being disillusioned by, a break in the capacity of us to get along right now as, as a community, but the underturning of people and humanity fighting through the difficulties of not connecting with each other in hopes to find that connection again.
Kathy, I'm so happy to see you're joining with us. I'm wondering what brought you to this topic, perhaps, or maybe to hear Marianne. you have something that brought you here with us to share. There's a mute button on the lower left corner of your Zoom screen that you could turn on to unmute. Yeah.
Oh, were you addressing me? I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
I just joined the Moving Center just this week.
Oh,
Come on, a 14-day unlimited, and this subject caught my eye. This topic.
mhm. Did you like I hear about Helen Keller as you were growing up?
What is that?
Did you hear about Helen Keller growing up?
Yes, especially through that movie.
Oh, right. Where it's the one that she's being taught by her teacher, Anne Frank.
Yeah, yeah. That was
Yeah.
a fantastic movie. And hearing about her again today is just incredible. Incredible to not have those two senses. And she wouldn't have it any other way.
Right. Right. Yeah, she kind of perceived it as a blessing.
Yes, she did.
I'm sure it didn't start out that way. You know, when we're first introduced to her, either in the movie or in the book, I think she has an autobiography that I think I must have read as a young person. She's like this wild animal, right? It seems like she's so just one bottled frustration, because and she doesn't know what's wrong, but the sense that I got from it is she cannot communicate with that outside world. And so you see her just becoming this very spoiled child because the parents felt so sorry for her not being able to see or hear. So they give her anything that she wants. She's grabbing things off people's dinner plates and shoving it in her mouth, you know, just and just the magic of having that teacher. I mean, that teacher is a shero too, you know, to take on the challenge of teaching this child, um, uh, and just what that understanding was, that opening up of the mind when, you know, she has her hand under the water and her other hand as the teacher pumping in the the letters that spell water. And you just get the sense of this mind that's waking up. It was, oh, I don't know, like apocalyptic, but in the good way. Just something so transformative about that scene. Yeah, it's really inspiring, wasn't it, to
Yes,
see?
it was.
Yeah.
I wanted
Thank
to
you
get
for this
back to
program.
Bob, just Robert's statement a little bit about evil, and she quoted it back about, and I'm just reading through just to kind of address that, is that before the moment she could dream, and she did have visualizations in her dream, which she didn't have context for, which is a phenomenon that would be fascinating to explore. But before she gave identity and continuity to her experience, she was developing these sensations at an extremely acute or nano level. But before she could do that, she said, my mind was in a state of anarchy in which meaningless sensations rioted as if they existed. It was so vague and inconsequential, and she couldn't be part of her discourse. And so going back to this idea of the, you know, looking at our disconnect in our perception in our brains, not being able to put the function to it, she became, through the neural that association that she could do, through the work with Anne Sullivan, she could start to put that name to it, and it stopped that evil or darkness or anarchy of her mind. And in the looking at this partner of mine in life that has this mental illness, his mind is broken. And so, the subtle attempts to kind of get back into this, her work is extremely hopeful, but there somehow needs to be that association to the subtler energies having a good vibration crawling underneath the negative experience of the mind. But I like that idea of anarchy, because it's that word is just such a struggling word, and what that feels like when you're, things aren't cooperating and the energy is so frenetic. Yet somehow she was able to train and be consistent with that. I did not grow up with her story. It was, it was lost in my generation to do this, I think. And so I think we're innately still captivated by our own senses, no matter what epoch we encounter. So it was interesting to hear your stories of growing up and hearing more about her, because we didn't have that.
Yeah, Kathy.
Did Helen Keller say that of the two senses, sight and hearing, that she would prefer to have hearing over sight? That she could feel the vibration of people's emotions? Or hearing maybe the orchestra or whatever?
She did say that sight was the most enhanced sensory experience. So perhaps that would answer it, but I don't know the quote of her referencing that particularly. But that was like the crowning glory was sight.
It actually, to me, does make sense that she would have visions in her dreams, since she was sighted until she was about 18 months old, as if my memory serves, 15 to 18 months old. So she had, within this lifetime, experience of visual imagery that one imagines she could then carry forward. Bob Bus?
Yeah, I think that may also have a kind of cultural aspect too. The Western culture is very sight oriented. Our language works through the idea of sight. I think Asian languages might be a little more angled towards hearing, just as a possibility. But I think culturally it's kind of interesting to think of, say, like the Eskimos having so many words for snow. And those would come from the visual sense, in a sense of white and all these sorts of things. But it could also become tactile, because if you have experienced snow, it can be fluffy, white, soft, all the way to very hard crystalline, uh, um, kind of an aggressive feeling of hardness and sharpness. And you could feel those differences. What struck me as you were talking, though, about dreams is that oftentimes when I wake up from dreams, I tend to be forgetting the images that I had. But what stays with me immediately is the feeling tone of the dream. Overwhelmingly, I have fear or attractions. In the Buddhist sense, we have, positive emotions that we are attracted to, negative emotions that we're kind of repelled from, and then neutral ones. And that might be a way of organizing as well, that as a sense of, we can, uh, hope is a feeling that is not uh, evil in that sense. There's a negativity going on of what we're attracted to. So we feel a certain kind of gentleness, and then the more abusive side of feeling is there. And the emotions would come up through that perception, again, the sense of our minds. We don't sense emotions, we come up with them as ideas or surrounding our ideas.
Yeah. I wonder if we could maybe go through the space once. with any takeaway that each person has. And maybe something of that takeaway might have something to do with what it means for an individual to be a hero of light. Since that is our topic today, she does seem to exemplify that. So maybe I'll just go the way that I see people on my screen. Yeah, what a beautiful thing. The mind is as large as the universe. Diana, and then Deshen and Jade and Kathy and Bob Buss. And then if he's still here, Robert Moore. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I think for me, she is a ray of light. The way she was with the limitations that she had and the role model of living her life and being able to be optimistic with faith. And for me, a takeaway is, how do I listen and how do I feel and hear? And really trusting that internal knowing and feeling the vibrations of the trees and feeling the without the sound or without the sight, what does that energetically do? So I really enjoyed the talk. Marianne, you're just amazing. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I think for me, well, first of all, thank you, Marianne, for shedding light on Helen Keller. I think one of the beautiful things that stood out for me was the wisdom of imbalance is the source of creation, and creation is the source of balance. And that is a wonderful thing that we get to learn from the story of Helen Keller. And it's again a good reminder that also propels us to go even deeper within our perception, and seeing the possibilities of how that can even evolve, and see the nature from a sense of a purity.
Okay.
Thank you, Marianne, Renee, Bob, Diana, and everyone. I thought it was a beautiful sharing, and I really appreciated this quote right here. Really spoke to me. The mind is as large as the universe, and I really loved what Marianne and Renee and Bob talked about, opening up the mind, and how lack of senses does not dull the senses, and how one experiences sound, light, and darkness is tied with understanding nature and optimism. The conversation earlier, I think Renee or Bob brought up the question about optimism and evil, and why kind of Helen Keller, it seems like she was a hero of light in terms of seeing optimism, and yet to understand optimism, she had to understand evil. And it made me think of Alan Watts and how he talked about the concept of triangulation, how you have to take at least 3 points to understand and determine the location of something, and how that gives rise to the reality and self-awareness. So that was, again, another example of the light is born from the dark, and in the darkness is the light. And it's very beautiful. Thank you.
you. Kathy?
Thank you for this program. You know, I joined Still Moving Center for the hula and saw this about wisdom traditions. And I've been seeking for inspiration, and especially spiritual. And I feel it's lacking. And so when Helen Keller mentions the struggle is one of the greatest blessings, it truly touches me because of my anxiety struggles. And we all have different struggles, and I'm struggling with that right now. But I didn't realize she was such a philosopher, because what struck me is one of the quotes was about education. The highest result of education is tolerance. I think that is so profound. And education doesn't have to be just the scholarly side, the schooling. It's life experiences and things like that. But I never heard that angle before, and so that's really enlightening and encouraging to me, that tolerance is a biggie, like we have in Hawaii.
Right.
It's, we appreciate it, but to see it at that level by her, the highest result of education is tolerance. So to me, she is truly a hero of light.
Yes, indeed. Very perceptive. Thank you so much, Kathy. We're so glad you joined us today. Let's see, Bob Buss.
Well, I've really appreciated other people sharing here, especially at the end. And what struck me as Diana and Kathy were talking, and Jade and Deshan, I think that she's a hero because of her optimism, but also it struck me that one of the reasons she's so heroic is that her way of connecting is connective, is actually by touch. So that if you look at how people are connected to each other by sight, I see you out there. I'm separated. It's kind of dualistic. And hearing, I hear what's out there. But if you are touching, if that's your primary thing, then you are definitely feeling with someone. I mean, you're together. You have a tactile connection that is real, and your ideas will come out of that. So you'll have a certain hopefulness or courage based on that tactile intimacy that isn't there in sight and hearing. So her ideas have that tone of real connection, of real tactile intimacy. That was amazing to me, and I hadn't thought of that about her before. But I think it does give you an idea of where her philosophy is coming from.
Yes. Interesting. So many of us, the only people that we touch are those who are just like maybe part of our intimate family. And whereas for her, she had to touch everyone to communicate. Yeah. Robert?
Well, I very much appreciated Marianne's presentation of Helen Keller, because you gave us this a feeling of intimacy, like if we were to use our sense of perception, that we would have a sense of gentleness and intimacy that we would miss if we don't really pay attention to our sense of perception. So that's what I really appreciated from, I mean, I just felt like there was this inner realm of sympathy and gentleness that is easy to miss unless you look for it.
Very beautiful. Thank you so much, Robert. Well, Marianne, we all just have a huge debt of gratitude to you for your presentation today and what it opened up for each of us. I want to mention that next week, Bob Buss will be our presenter. It will be the week when we're recognizing Buddha Purnima, which in at least some of the Buddhist traditions is recognized as the day of the birth, the enlightenment and the death of the Buddha. And so we have the topic of the therapy of the Buddha, which Bob is going to present from both the Vipassana and also the Zen therapy Buddhist traditions. So we have that to look forward to as well. And all of us really put our hands together in thanks to you for your presentation today, Mariange. Thank you so much.
Mahalo, and I wish your celebration and your hula dance goes flowingly. And
Thank you.
beautiful. And I really enjoyed each of your comments. It was made a feeling of only being able to see you, but a feeling that I was able to communicate through my interpretation of her work. I'm humbled by that. Thank you.
We're indeed. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Namaste.
thank you all.
Aloha. Thank you.
Bye.
So nice to have you, Kathy. Maybe you'll come to May Day tomorrow. But if you want to, you have to make sure to get a reservation.
Be online probably.
Okay.
Thank
I'll
you.
look forward to meeting you at the studio at some point.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Take
What a
care.
bonus today was. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.